Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. For the America First, Second, and Third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, June 5th, 2015. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. If I sound a little out of breath, it's because I was going up to our mailboxes to get our mail because I saw the little postal delivery truck there. And this postal worker, lady, just sitting there in the truck chatting on her cell phone. I'm pointing at the mailbox, and she's just going, yeah. Still out there. I just looked out the window. And they wonder why our country can't work any longer. All righty, so let's see. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in our third hour with her unique perspective on the world. Now then, getting into the news here, Syrian warplanes bomb ISIS near Hasakeh. And it looks like Assad is basically on the warpath trying to keep ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all these other front groups and hired mercenaries from kicking him out. This is now, 4 years? The U.S. has been trying to get rid of Assad. And now they're having to use all these proxies and made-up front groups because the American people are sick and tired of war. And the official story is, no, we have nothing to do with ISIS, but yet we have these recently declassified documents that prove, yes, ISIS is a U.S. creation that they're using for foreign policy in the hope that you will not realize that ISIS is just as phony as Al-Qaeda was. Because our government operates on the principle, if at first you don't succeed, lie again. Now, up in Ukraine, the Donetsk People's Republic is saying Kiev has started deploying heavy weapons near the engagement line. This is, of course, a violation of the Minsk agreement and the ceasefire. And apparently, Donetsk has been shelled 46 times over the last 24 hours. So Poroshenko obviously is not abiding by the terms of the ceasefire. Now, Poroshenko, even though Ukraine has officially recognized the borders of the Republic of Crimea, he's back out there saying that the goals of Kiev right now are the return of Crimea, that's a non-starter, and the end of the war in Donbass. Well, Poroshenko can stop the war in Donbass anytime he wants to. He can just stop making war. What he wants is for the other side to surrender and come back into the warm embrace of the European Union and the European Central Bank. Now, he's had a little bit of a setback up in Austria because Kiev went to the Austrian court system and laid claim to property owned by Russia in Vienna. And the courts came back and said, no, you don't have any standing to come into Austria and say that we have to transfer property owned by Russians into your personal ownership. And remember, we were talking yesterday, Ukraine may be broke. Poroshenko is making out like a bandit. He's making huge amounts of money. But good for the Austrian courts. They decided not to get involved in this theft under guise of legality. Now, over in Russia, Scott Blackland, the former head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Russia, is basically, he's being kicked out. He's going to be on a plane tonight. In fact, could even be getting on the plane right now, because Russia has come to understand, as has the rest of the world, that these various NGOs like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, USAID, all of these organizations are fronts for covert interference in other people's country. Remember when they were trying to kick up the revolution riots over in Hong Kong? And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was neck deep in that. It's one of the front groups the U.S. uses to destabilize other countries. Russia doesn't want to have that happening, and so they're starting to kick these people out, and they're well advised to do that. Now, over at Counterpunch, they had an article, An Economic Reason for the U.S. versus China Conflict. And from this article, it is obvious that my analysis about these conflicts and the reasons behind them are beginning to spread and go viral, because this article is saying the same thing I've been saying. This is all about the dominance of the dollar, blocking of the rise of the yuan and the renminbi, because right now the United States, having abandoned most of its manufacturing, having destroyed its own agricultural exports with GMO, is totally dependent now on keeping the dollar as the main global trade and banking currency off of which the U.S. siphons a small piece of the action through interest and various other manipulations. And so everybody's finally waking up to what's really going on, what is behind all these wars, the making stink face at Russia and China. It's all about whose brand of ink and paper the world is going to be forced to use for the next 100 years. And I think probably most parents in most countries are not going to be willing to send their own children to be killed and crippled over this argument between the bankers, which is what it really is all about. Now, down in Yemen, it's being estimated that the Saudi-led naval blockade, keeping out humanitarian aid, has left 20 million people of Yemen facing a humanitarian disaster. 80% of the population is in urgent need of food, water, and medical supplies. This is not a war against Houthi rebels. This is punishment of the entire country of Yemen on behalf of the United States of America by Saudi Arabia acting as a proxy for daring to kick out their U.S. puppet ruler Hadi. That's what this is really all about. And remember, collective punishment is a war crime. Now, article by Paul Craig Roberts over at RINF.com, The Empire Was Temporarily Defeated, and they're talking about recent events in Macedonia to destabilize and have a coup d'etat there, and it has pretty much failed. Macedonia had been watching all of these covert assets as they began to move and had a list. They simply arrested them, and all of these Washington, D.C. funded non-governmental organizations, they rounded them up and kicked them out of the country. So Macedonia still belongs to the Macedonians right now. Now, here's an interesting story. ISIS sustains casualties in clashes with Hamas in Gaza Strip. Supposedly, ISIS has gone into Gaza to make war on Hamas. Okay? Funny how ISIS can be counted on to always be attacking Israel's enemies, Hamas, Syria, whatever, but never Israel itself. Kind of makes you wonder, who's ISIS really working for? But again, because of recently declassified and leaked documents, we know ISIS is a manufactured front group for covert U.S. and Israeli operation. And once you understand that, ISIS behavior becomes very, very understandable. Now, as you know, with Israel being bought to back off the P5+1 deal with Iran, Netanyahu needs something else he can whine and complain about, and they've shifted over to the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. And Israel has now branded BDS as a strategic threat to the existence of Israel, as if Israel will vanish if people stop buying SodaStream machines. Now, obviously, BDS is having an effect. The bad news is, by declaring the boycott a strategic threat and an existential threat, Israel will now feel itself justified using violence against BDS organizers and supporters. They'll have an excuse. Oh, they're a threat to Israel, so we can go out and assassinate them and so forth. All right, quick call. Jeff in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. Sorry to switch gears on you, but in light of the two recent FOIA hearings that have happened up in Sandy Hook that Wolfgang Halbig has been involved in, I'm continually frustrated. Maybe you can clear this up for me. Why can't we get the autopsy photos of Adam Lanza? He was not a victim, nor was he a minor. Do you have any idea why those have not been released or nobody's been able to get them?
Well, yeah, it's part of the cover-up. I mean, let's be honest here. Every time the government does one of these false flags, they're going to ignore the law, Freedom of Information Act, in order to keep the cover-up in place. They will never voluntarily release anything that calls into question the official story. I remember when there was a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court trying to get the autopsy, or rather the crime scene photos of Vince Foster, and the Supreme Court turned it down, saying that dead people have a right to privacy. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to talk about the economy just a little bit. Greece has missed the 300 million euro payment owed to the IMF. They absolutely missed it. No developed country has ever missed a payment to the IMF. But if you're holding one of those credit default swaps sold on Greece's debt, don't get excited. Remember, defaults are acknowledged by a committee on Wall Street made up of representatives of the companies who sell those credit default swaps. And they have a long track record of trying to pretend defaults have not actually happened. What they're calling this one is it's a delay. They haven't defaulted. They're delaying. They're going to bundle this payment with a larger payment that's due in another month, and all will be well. Of course, Greece is not going to make that payment. But this is how they're going to screw the holders of those credit default swaps by saying, it's only a delay, it's only a delay. That's all it is. You know, we don't have to pay on those credit default swaps because this is just a delay, and somewhere in the next 2,000-3,000 years, Greece will make good on this. Now, Greece is saying they were basically provoked into the situation by the arrogant attitude of the IMF, ECB, all the rest of the creditors who came in with that pre-written document and said, look, you sign this or else. And Greece said, else. Now, the Greek Prime Minister is addressing their parliament. Stocks are sliding, and as we knew was going to happen, Athens is turning to Moscow, looking to simply cut all their ties with the European Union, cut all their economic ties with the West completely, merge with the Shanghai Cooperative Organization or BRICS or whatever else. And a big part of that issue is the odious portion of Greece's debt, which was created through fraud and underhanded subterfuge by Goldman Sachs. I'm going to start calling them Goldman Rats. By Goldman Rats and former Greek ruler Papandreou. And it is, under the classic definition, odious debt, and the people shouldn't be held responsible to it. But the money junkie attitude is, we don't care how the debt was created. It is sacrosanct. It is holy. You will serve the debt for the rest of your life, and so too will your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's how the system is set up, to enslave individuals and nations to permanently unpayable debt in order to rule and control them. Now, the protest marches in Germany ahead of the G7 are continuing to grow. This is in Munich, which is a lovely city. I was there back in the 1980s working on a film project. And people are very upset about the G7. So far, the protests are peaceful and orderly. Have to keep an eye out for agent provocateurs so that the German police can go on in and start cracking skulls and say, oh, these people protesting the G7, they're bad. The G7 is good, they're bad, which is, again, a repeating pattern here. Now, speaking of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we are hearing that Syria and Egypt are considering joining, at least as observers for the immediate future. But that's usually the first step to full membership. We're seeing bit by bit the entire world is pulling out of this Western private central bank dominated slave system and going with alternatives. And the U.S. basically had this attitude of, there'll never be an alternative. We're it. The dollar reigns supreme. There will never be an alternative. Now there is. And people are looking around and they're saying, you know, it's really to our advantage to get away from the predatory, money junkie, private central bank model and go with these alternate systems. And that's exactly what's happening. Now, we're actually starting to see people on Wall Street, even within the Federal Reserve itself, talk about the danger of just how big the debt has grown. Of course, their spin is it's all somehow somebody else's fault. No, it isn't. The fatal flaw, the instability in that private central bank model is that it produces more debt than money with which to pay the debt, and the debt grows and grows and grows and grows until the weight of it crashes the system, which is where we are right now. So there's another article over at Deviant Investor, Debt and the Tinderbox. And they're talking about how estimates are that in response to the 2008 meltdown, the Federal Reserve created over $16 trillion in new currency out of thin air. Bank of America alone received over $1.3 trillion. They're propping up the financial system with the printing press. And they're pointing out something that everybody already understands. If you're already rich and you were invested in stocks and bonds, this runaway money printing was good for you. Made you much richer than you had been before. For everybody else, It's a bad thing. Because when you have too much currency chasing too few goods and services, prices will go up. Prices always rise to absorb the available spending money. Now, we're looking at another story from Investment Watch blog, how $9 trillion seems to be missing from the Federal Reserve. There's a record of its creation. Nobody knows where it went. Golly gee, it was here a minute ago. Nobody knows where it went. But remember, anytime the Federal Reserve creates new money, it is considered a debt owed back to that private central bank by the American people. So do the math. $9 trillion means $30,000 from every single living American. Okay? That's over and above the accumulated debt that we had before 2008. This is just the money that went missing. Ooh, missing money. Somebody's getting very rich off of this scheme. Speaking of missing money, we've talked a lot about how the day before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld got up there at the Pentagon and admitted the Pentagon had misplaced another $2.5 trillion. Gee, it was here yesterday. We don't know where it went. We're sorry. And, of course, the passenger jet that hit the Pentagon flew around the Pentagon, coming in from the other side, and plowed right into the offices of the accountants who were trying to figure out where that money had gone. Well, not having learned anything from their errant ways, it is now estimated the total missing funds from the Pentagon now are $8.5 trillion that has gone through the Pentagon, and they have no idea where it went. That's a lot of money. $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, and soon you're talking some real bucks. It's amazing. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break. When we get back, we're going to talk about the new jobs report, which surprised everybody. Everybody was expecting low numbers. Huzzah, huzzah, the numbers are up. And if you believe them, I have some of Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons to sell you. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to talk about the economy here. Now, today, the jobs report for May came out from the U.S. government. Now, earlier in the week, analysts were expecting this to be a bad number, possibly even below 200,000. But, huzzah, huzzah, somehow the information, the numbers were processed and seasonally corrected, whatever, and they came up with a number of 280,000 jobs in May. And they're out there with the headline that so far America has added over 1 million new jobs in the year 2015. Okay, how many jobs were lost during that same time period? Have you ever noticed they never mention that? And they're even acknowledging that the unemployment rate went up, which would normally suggest more jobs were lost than created, but they're not giving you that number of jobs lost. And we've been hearing in the news over the last couple of weeks about this company's letting go people and that company's letting go people. And, of course, they never mention how many high-paying jobs are lost and are replaced by low-paying minimum wage jobs. They don't include that as well. Now, in this article I'm looking at over at CNN, they're dismissing the increase in the unemployment rate by saying, well, more people returned to look for work in May. How could they possibly know that? It's not like people call up the government and say, I have decided after 2 years of not being able to find a job that I will start looking for work. It's a completely made-up excuse. Now, the jobs data is acknowledging there are 92,986,000 people willing and able to work who cannot find a job. In a nation of almost 330 million Americans, 92 million don't have a job. This does not map out to a 5.6, 5.7% unemployment rate. The absurdity right there tells you, once again, the government is lying to you to try and lull you into a false sense that things are getting better. Don't get angry. Don't get upset. Remember, anger is bad. Rage is bad. You have to love your government. You have to love and believe your corporate media here. Now, the other numbers that are coming out are also not good. U.S. first quarter productivity plunged 3%. Unit labor cost surged 6.7%. Corporate profits are collapsing. And that, in turn, will trigger more layoffs. But they never mention those. They only count the new jobs created and present it as if that's the entire universe, and it isn't. Clearly, it is not. Right now in California, the housing market is shifting from ownership to rentals. Right now, only 1 out of 3 California families can afford to buy a home, any home, a junky home in the market. And more homes are being converted to rental units. They can't sell them. Now, the other day, President Obama, who's been making a lot of very bizarre statements lately, and he's either not taking enough antidepressants or way too many, about this thing about how under his leadership America is the most respected nation on earth. That's nonsense. Hated, yes. Feared, yes. Respected, no. And then he had this bizarre comment about how he, Barack Obama, is the closest thing to a Jew to ever sit in the Oval Office. Now, I would like to remind those people who monitor this show for the White House that Lyndon Johnson's mother and wife were both Jewish, and under Jewish tradition, that made President Johnson a Jew. And he certainly was on Israel's side, because he was in charge during that whole Israeli attack on the USS Liberty. Let's blame it on Egypt. That fell apart. Oh, yes, we'll go along and say it was just a terrible accident. So, no, Barry, you are not the closest thing to a Jew to sit in the Oval Office. Maybe it's time for the 25th Amendment to get invoked. Who knows? And I'll tell you, if there's one accomplishment we can point to for the Obama presidency that will stand forth in future history books, is that Barack Obama has made George W. Bush look good. Polls are showing that Americans have a more favorable view of George W. Bush than Barack Obama. That is a real trick to pull off, to make W look good. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Al, out in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, quick question. I'm at work, so I'll give my question and then listen offline.
Okay.
What do you think about Donald Trump for president in 2016?
He would be entertaining. You know, he would probably be more entertaining. We could make a lot more fun of him than any of the other candidates running. But, with the possible, and I haven't decided, exception of Bernie Sanders, there isn't anybody in the race right now that I want anywhere near, our White House.
I'm feeling the same way, so Donald's looking better and better to me every day.
No, he isn't. Donald wants the presidency to put up on his trophy shelf. That's it. He doesn't want to actually do the job, and I don't think he could actually do the job. The presidency's a figurehead anyway. The real power has left Washington, D.C. It's over on Wall Street, and I'm sure that Donald Trump would be as sympathetic to Wall Street as Mitt Romney would have been had he won the election. So no, I don't want Donald Trump as the president, other than for entertainment value.
Yeah, it's looking pretty slim pickings here, isn't it?
It really is, and looking at how the current economic and war situation is right now, I have to seriously question the sanity of anybody who wants that job.
Who even wanted to be there.
Yeah, I mean, you want to be the number one position of a country that is on the verge of economic collapse and losing a world war? Boy, oh boy, your ego is writing checks your body cannot cash on that one.
Yeah, and unfortunately, if we got someone that really had the gnodes, they'd probably end up being assassinated anyway, so that's another aspect of it.
That's another reason why my own campaign is really just humorous, and I'm not seriously running. And again, I could never be president. I'm not willing to sell out the country to Israel or the military-industrial complex or the security-industrial complex, and I won't lie to the American people. I did inhale.
Yep,
both times.
You take care,
and
Mike.
I enjoyed it. All right.
Bye now.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, we're going to let him go here. Now then, the pay-to-play scheme is continuing to unravel. We already talked about this before, but a quick mention of just one example. Sweden gave the Clintons $26 million into their foundation. At the same time, they were trying to get Hillary's State Department to waive Iran sanctions that were interfering with their business. And the Clinton campaign is saying, it's just a coincidence. It's just completely coincident. One hand did not know what the other was doing, honestly. But again, Hillary's campaign and Hillary herself are treating this like lawyers. If they can't prove it, it's not a problem. But American voters are not lawyers. And politics is perception. And the perception is that the Clintons have always been crooked and Hillary is not changing her ways. We're even seeing over at CNN, their latest polls, Hillary's numbers are plunging. CNN's words. In the wake of these Clinton cash revelations, she's already in trouble. And we haven't even started to uncork on her for the travel office firings, the cattle futures trade, getting fired from the Watergate Committee for ethics violations, Vince Foster. Whitewater, Flowerwood, Castle Grande, Morgan Guarantee and Trust, the Arkansas Development Finance Authority. We have got a huge body of material to uncork on Hillary as she moves forward in her campaign. Hillary is carrying more baggage than Kim Kardashian on a photo shoot. And that's the reality. Now then, interesting little story. Oh, we got to take a break for commercials. I'm not even paying attention to my clock. We'll be right back with more about Hillary Beast. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, there has been a lot of complaint from the press and even from the general public about Hillary's behavior as she's out there stumping around, just isolated, totally isolated from the media. As a matter of fact, over at Fox News, Elizabeth Harrington came out and said Hillary is clearly more comfortable with fundraising than actually campaigning. And the reason for that, I think, is illustrated by Hillary's sudden rush to demand automatic voter registration for the entire country. She's out there accusing the GOP of trying to suppress votes. No, what's going on here is that Hillary's starting to realize the only way she's going to get into the White House, she's going to have to steal the next election. And her vote riggers need lots and lots of registered voters who are not actually voting in order to do that. And because of that, Hillary doesn't have time for ordinary people, meeting them. She doesn't care. She doesn't need them. She needs the money. And that's why she's out there doing that. Now, a very alarming article coming out of 12160. Apparently, Hillary Clinton admires Margaret Sanger. And if you are not familiar with the name, this actually goes back to the 1930s. Because in the 1930s, there was a eugenics movement here in the United States of America, which advocated preventing people who were considered inferior from reproducing, possibly even euthanizing them, to mold the breed to improve the species. Only people with superior traits, like greed and sociopathy, would be allowed to breed. And that was it. And it's basically population control and government getting to decide who does and does not have children. Margaret Sanger, in her book Pivot of Civilization, referred to the undesirable elements of the human population as human weeds, reckless breeders, spawning human beings who never should have been born. Now, it's a little irony of history that Adolf Hitler got his program for race hygiene in Germany from the American eugenics movement. And of course, what Hitler did with it was so offensive that the American eugenics movement basically had to shut up, go away. They were seen as part of the build-up to Hitler's abuses. But they never really went away. There's still a large number of people going around this country saying we should have the right to tell others whether or not they are allowed to have babies. We have to have baby licenses here. The world is overpopulated with useless eaters, to paraphrase George W. Bush. And Hillary Clinton apparently thinks this is all very, very cool. All right, we're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Andrew in New York, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I want to talk about, how more people are listening to the Internet, but I would also want to warn how, the government hires people to put disinformation on the Internet. For example, yesterday you were talking about the Source falls, how they were saying, the Russians tried to assassinate John Kerry. I'm like, doesn't really make a sense. The Russians have no motives for that.
That's exactly it, and I'm glad you brought that up, because we keep saying, if you want to find out if you're being fed a lie, look for what should be there and isn't, because all of these nonsensical stories are always lacking a critical part that would have to be there for it to make any sense. It's like when John Kerry was out there screaming that Assad was using sarin gas on his own people, okay? Why was he doing that? And there was never a motive. The people were always out there saying there never was a passenger jet at the Pentagon. Okay, why would the government engage in a swap or subterfuge? What's their motive for doing that? I don't know. And that's where all of these things tend to fall apart very, very quickly. But yes, the government is spending huge amounts of money trying to control the discussion here on the Internet. Lying on behalf of the government is a booming industry, practically the only one we've got left right now. Maybe that's where they're getting all these new job creation. You know, can you use the Internet? We have work from home, and we will get in. And that's where they're recruiting all these people.
Also, I wanted to recommend, there's this political analyst, Joel Skousen, and his website is called worldaffairsbrief.com.
Okay.
And I was interested, if you want to look up about, there's this article that he has in his website, the top right corner. And his article is Strategic Threats of the Coming Decade. If you're interested in learning about, like, the geopolitical situation we're facing, it's a pretty good article. I recommend that you should look it up.
All right, would you do me a favor and email me that URL, because the phone connection here is not a good one, and I'm having trouble understanding exactly what you said. But just go ahead and email me the URL, and I will take a look at that, okay? Andrew, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. And before the news break, we're going to go to DJ in Georgia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, yep, thanks for taking the call. Well, I was going to say to the last caller, the article had nothing to do about Russia attempting the assassination. So I don't know if you read it from a different source. But anyways, the reason I called, Obama made a comment in the press the other day to I guess it was the Jewish media press. He said that he was the closest thing to a Jew, or he was a Jew in the White House.
Yeah, closest thing to a Jew to ever sit in the office, yes. Yeah,
and I was like, well, Obama he doesn't know what he is. First he said he was Kenyan, and we all know he's definitely not Kenyan. He has so many different stories and backgrounds that he can't even get them straight. You know, he can't figure out what he is. So I thought that was hilarious. The other story was the FIFA scandal. A lot of people are not mentioning the fact that the 2018 World Cup was scheduled to be in Russia.
Yes.
Everyone seems to be talking about the one in Qatar or Qatar, and the whole point. Everyone knew that the FIFA's been corrupt and taking bribes for a long time, but
all these big sports organizations are corrupt. NFL, American League, National League. That's how they get their business done. And huge amounts of money coming in, but they're still technically nonprofit organizations. Here's what's going on. This is the U.S. wanting to punish Russia for what the U.S. is hallucinating Russia's doing in Ukraine. Okay, and what they don't realize is if they succeed in pulling the World Cup away from Russia in 2018, they're actually doing Putin a favor, because it will save Russia the billions of dollars that it would cost to set up all the infrastructure here. I mean, John Oliver did this brilliant piece about this, where they went down to Brazil and they were showing the stadium Brazil built for, $1 billion, and after the World Cup, it's never been used. They're using it to store city buses. And any time the World Cup goes into a country, it's a financial disaster for that country. So go ahead, Obama, take away the World Cup from Russia in 2018. You're actually doing Putin a favor.
Well, yeah, and that was the funny thing is no one mentions the fact that it's going to be in Russia next. Everyone's talking about the one in Qatar where it's too hot, it's in the desert, and I'm like, well, that's in 2022, and the only reason that they're doing this is it's on the list of nasty things to do to Russia to get back at them. It's diplomatic, type of move where
and like the sanctions, it's going to backfire. You know, Russia would act. Yeah, Russia's going to save all that money, and you know, if they really wanted to punish Russia, just say, you know, Russia has to host the World Cup every time for the rest of eternity.
And get this, well, the embarrassing part about it too is Britain actually wanted to get the World Cup, and they had a vote on it, and they were outvoted. 22 votes went to Russia. I think 5 went to Spain, and I think England got 1.
Yeah.
So it was just a diplomatic failure, and that was the the story there. But of course, the media didn't bring about it. And one thing I learned from this show is you never can underestimate the money junkies, how far they'll go.
I mean, all of these, whether it's World Cup or even the Olympics, you know, the people on the inside make huge fortunes off of this whole thing, and the actual hosting countries wind up losing tons and tons of money. I mean, yes, there's an increase in business for hotels and food providers and everything, but overall, these are major hits to the economy. Nations will put up with it for the prestige, but at this point, I think Russia would be perfectly happy to say, yeah, go ahead and take back the World Cup. We don't need to spend that kind of money here. All right, DJ, got to let you go. We got to take a break for the news, and we will be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we just put up a story over at whatreallyhappened.com. This is coming out of Battle Creek Inquirer, and the headline reads, Sale of Michigan Company to China May Haunt Clinton. And they're basically talking about how when Clinton was in New Hampshire last month, she was out there complaining about the sale of A123 systems built with millions in U.S. taxpayer funding to Chinese investors and saying this is a serious problem for high tech. And she's out there saying it concerns me that China is buying these companies. Well, the Republican National Committee Chairman Reince Priebus, in a statement, said Clinton is just doing lip service because as Secretary of State, her department signed off on all of these sales. So all of this stuff is coming back to haunt her, and Hillary does not seem to understand that in the age of the Internet, the life expectancy of a lie can be clocked with an egg timer. All righty. Now then, let's see. We're going to grab a phone call here. Labar in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I know it's a lot of background noise, so I'll just ask the question and listen. But I just wanted your take on what you think about Jade Helm and what it's all about.
Okay, I know a lot of stuff has been thrown out there that Jade Helm is preparing for martial law in this country, and that may be part of its purpose. But considering that we're getting reports of live-fire military exercises, I think what's really going on is our Army is being retrained for wide-ranging warfare against a peer. Because about a week ago, we had a statement coming from an official in the Pentagon saying that the training doctrine for U.S. military forces has been counterinsurgency for the last decade. In other words, slapping down conquered nations that refuse to stay conquered, and they're really not up to speed having to do, frontal military engagements against equals. And I think that's a big part of what Jade Helm is all about, is trying to very quickly train up U.S. military forces for a possible rush across Ukraine into Russia or into China or whatever. Yes, at the same time, they're learning how to take control of U.S. urban areas, but I don't think Obama is going to declare a national emergency and a dictatorship in only 9 states of the Union, because the other 41 would immediately start fortifying their borders if he did that. I think this is simply training the U.S. military forces for the upcoming major wars against peers, meaning Russia and China. Are you there? Okay, I guess we lost it.
I'm here, Mike. I was just listening. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
All right, the very, very bad connection. We're going to let him go there. Now then, Sheldon Adelson, who's out there writing checks to any politician who will swear undying fealty to Tel Aviv, is out there reviving an old propaganda tool of Israel, that there was never really such a place as Palestine, There are no Palestinian people. I mean, even Golda Meir was out there saying there's no such thing as a Palestine. It never existed. This was a land without a people for a people without a land, which was absolute and complete nonsense. In fact, for those of you on BAM User, I am holding a Palestinian coin minted in 1935. It's a 50 mil coin. The evidence that there was a Palestine before the nation of Israel is overwhelming, but Sheldon Adelson is out there saying Palestinians are just a made-up notion. They just made up Palestine to destroy Israel. That's their only reason for existence. That the Palestinians just created themselves out of thin air just because they don't like Israel. Well, I think when you go into somebody else's home and steal it and kill them and marginalize them and exploit them, they're not going to remain entirely cheerful. And that's just the way it is. But this idea that there was no Palestine or Palestinians is nonsense. And we have an article I put up at whatreallyhappened.com. Israel versus Palestine. The maps tell the story. And the maps show who it is who's really trying to wipe who off of the map. And it's not Palestine to Israel, it's the other way around. And toward the bottom of the article are videos, maps from the Middle Ages that all show Palestine has been there all along. Israel is the interloper. Now, there's an article out of Electronic Infatata claiming to preserve Jerusalem. Israeli archaeologists wreck Palestinian heritage. Israel's archaeology, remember, Israel's entire justification for being there is based on this idea that there was this amazing kingdom of David and Solomon, which has left virtually no traces of itself, and that's the reason they can come in and take it away from Palestine. And in their rush to dig down and try and find something they can claim as proof of their prior residency and occupancy of the land, they're destroying a lot of Palestinian heritage. And that is also intentional. And I remember this story from a few years, well, it's more than a few years now, where the Palestinian women have this amazing affinity for embroidery and would produce these absolutely beautiful embroidered garments. And they arranged a touring exhibition to go around the world with samples of Palestinian embroidery. And the exhibit got to the Los Angeles International Airport, and it promptly vanished. From inside a secured area, it just simply disappeared. Because Israel doesn't want there to be any evidence whatsoever that there really was a Palestine and a Palestinian people. Just like Sheldon Adelson's out there saying, no, Palestine was invented just to get at Israel. That's his attitude. And it is complete and utter nonsense. And again, the evidence that there was a real Palestine and a Palestinian people is overwhelming. Israel just wants you to erase them from the globe, from history, from memory. Now, the organizers of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement are saying that their boycott against Orange, phone company in France, will continue until they actually do cut their ties to Israel's occupation. And Orange today is confirming they're ending a licensing deal with its Israeli affiliate Partner Communications. And of course, Netanyahu is out there screaming. He's demanding France force Orange to go on doing business with Israel, calling for the head of Orange to be removed from his job. How dare you just go along with this? Orange is saying it's just simple economics. The harm caused by the boycott exceeds any possible profits coming from Israel. And that's how it works. That's what boycotts do. Boycotts are a recognized, peaceful form of protest. Now then, as you know, the Tourism Suppression Agency, the TSA, has come under serious criticism over the years, most recently because of an internal test run by the Department of Homeland Security, which found that 96% of the simulated bombs and weapons got through the TSA gates. Now, the first thing we can take away from that is there are no real terrorists out there trying to get on our airplanes, because the odds are they would have made it. And if they didn't make it, if they were caught by TSA at the gate, bomb the gate. Okay? So there are no real terrorists out there. There are just the phonies like Adam Gadon and Yusuf Al-Khattab and Joseph Cohen and the rest of them. They're all actors. Emmanuel Goldstein. And there's an article that has come out over at USA Today, no less, saying that TSA has no excuse to continue groping people. And they don't. In all these years of groping our wives, our daughters, our girlfriends, stealing from our luggage, they have never actually found a single terrorist. Not once. They smashed a laptop of mine in Seattle. They're completely useless. They're there to intimidate travelers so that you'll behave. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, I just put up a story at whatreallyhappened.com. South Carolina becomes the first U.S. state to take action against anti-Israel boycotts. Now, the law is specifically saying you can't boycott somebody because of their national origin or their religion. But that's not the issue here. The issue is the actions of the government of Israel, and boycotts are a recognized form of protest protected by the First Amendment. There actually is already a U.S. law that makes it a crime for American companies to boycott Israel. It hasn't been enforced all that much because it will never survive a Supreme Court test. The law does not apply to individuals. And you, as Americans, are free to simply not buy products from Israel. And if anybody asks, why are you not buying this product? Well, they're not very good. I like this other product better. End of discussion. Now, what we may see is a change in the laws regarding products identifying where they come from. We already talked about how the World Health Organization has now convinced the United States government to remove the country of origin from meat products at the supermarket. So you don't know if the hamburger you're eating came from Omaha, Nebraska, or someplace in South America, or someplace where mad cow disease is running rampant. You don't need to know. Just buy your piece of a cow and eat it and you will be happy. We could easily see that same law applied to other products. However, you need to remember that little UPC barcode, the leading numbers identify the country the product is from. And I don't think they're going to be changing that anytime soon. All right, we're going to go to the phone call. Peter in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, when it comes to the Supreme Court, I'm not exactly sure about that. 4 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices are Jewish. Secretary of the Treasury, head of the Federal Reserve, head of the IMF, 30 or 35 members of Congress.
Yeah, we have a Vichy government. We have a Vichy government here in the United States of America, and that really is.
Let me go on just for a second. All of our media, as we know, the corporate media, the fact that you can't say anything on campus without getting some troll getting a professor fired for even mentioning the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. The fact that they're monitoring the internet with that software where their trolls will be all over you, and defending Israel. It's hard for me to escape the neocons. It's hard for me to escape the conclusion, Mike, with Sabin and Haim Saban and Sheldon Adelson and all these other guys, that they used to talk about an international conspiracy. And it's hard for me to avoid the conclusion that there is one.
Oh, yeah, of course there's one. Of course there's one. Israel has subverted the U.S. government. Now, think back to the NSA before Edward Snowden, and most Americans didn't realize what was going on. And then Snowden came along. I mean, those of us who are, studying this, we knew that this was going on back to the 1980s with the Echelon system, Five Eyes. Okay? Right. But look at the huge outcry that has since erupted since ordinary people came to understand what was going on. The same thing is happening. The American people are waking up to the fact that there is, in fact, a puppet government in Washington, D.C. ruling this nation on behalf of a foreign power. And the people of Iraq didn't like it. People of Iran didn't like it. People of Libya didn't like it. People of Syria and all these other places, they don't like it. Why should we like it? Why should we be happy with a government that plunders us for the benefit of a foreign power? And the answer is we shouldn't be. And we need to be, Israel's trying to shout everybody down and scare us all back into staying silent about what's going on by saying, oh, you're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater. No, that's not the problem. We're talking about the actions of a government. And no government is above criticism. Trying to dismiss criticism of Israel's government as hatred of the Jews is no more legitimate than dismissing criticism of the Nazis as being hate of the Germans.
Yeah, but Michael, the population at large, I'm talking about the Jewish population, with their thousands of Sionim and Hasbara trolls, it's hard for me to not, point fingers and say they're absolutely enabling at the very least.
Oh, they're working as hard as they can to enable it. I mean, you're absolutely right. But remember, the actual Jewish population in the United States is only about 2-3%. Okay, so they're already overextended. That's why Israel's out there having to hand out scholarships and stuff to Jewish students who will go on the net and scream, you're an anti-Semite all over the place. That's why Abe Foxman is so well funded. And they do have an advantage in wealth and control of the government. But very clearly, looking at how the boycott movement has grown and spread around the globe, they are losing this war for the minds of the world. Israel has lost its image of perpetual victim. The horrors of World War II are so far removed from the present day they can't exploit that any longer. They're losing the public relations battle. And we just have to keep on pushing right now. And again, don't get sucked into Jew hate and anti-Semitism and the rest of it. That's not it. We're not talking about Israel's religion. We're not talking about their ethnicity. We're talking about their behavior. That's the problem. Their behavior. Nothing else.
I mean, but the root of it all, in my opinion, and also part of it is, I think, the exceptionalism, the chosen stuff, just like American exceptionalism, is the root of our stupid, ridiculous criminal empire. That theirs is based
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Their religion is that they are automatically superior. Everybody else is inferior. They're supposed to have all the money. They're supposed to have all the power. They're not supposed to blend or mix with the people anywhere that they live. Yes, a lot of this goes back to their religious beliefs, and that's why it's so unshakable. But, let's, again, we're not talking about their religion. We're talking about their behavior. Okay? And that's really, we have to stay the focus on there. We're critical of the behavior of Israel's government. A small number of people, sociopathic with delusions of being favored by the imaginary playmate in the sky, how they behave is the problem. Whether it's the constant assault on Gaza, stealing of the Palestinians' land, bribing of our government, blackmail of our government, massive spying on the American people. It's their behavior. That's the problem. And we need to keep attention focused on that.
Michael, can I draw a comparison here? I know that you're very knowledgeable about World War II. And to compare the German atrocities and German racism, which was basically Nazi party based, so it was politically based, versus Japanese, which was not only political, but it was also religiously.
It's culture. Yeah, yeah. Okay, listen, Peter, I got to put you on hold because we got to take a break for commercials, but I will bring you back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Before we go back to the phone call with Peter in California, I just have to comment here. I was looking at the Fox News feed on the commercial break, and they're doing a big story about how Miss Piggy received a feminism award from the Brooklyn Museum's Elizabeth Sackler Center for Feminist Art. They're really desperate to try and bring up feminism as an issue for Hillary to campaign on next year. And then they go off about how one of their own news readers is showing off her salsa dance moves over on The View. where Fox News seems to feel that their own news readers are now the news. And, of course, they're not talking about what's going on in the war zones or anything. They're just out there with, the job numbers are up. That's all you need to think about, and off to the fashion show. It really is getting rather absurd. So we're going to go back here to Peter in California. And, Peter, let's start off by a simple reality. Every leader in history, whether political or religious or even economic, has to convince their followers that they are somehow superior in order to justify simply taking things away from the others. We're the master race. We're the chosen people. We're the cultured ones. We are the light in a barbaric world. I mean, that was the Roman one. And so everybody is going to play that game. And yes, it is written into a lot of religions, not just Judaism. Some of the Christian sects believe that wealth is the sign of the elect, that God wants you to have more money because you're good and the other people you're taking the money from are bad. So that is unfortunately an aspect of power politics, and it's all about dehumanizing the opposition in order to make it easier to simply go out and commit crimes against them, theft, murder, and so forth.
Well, I agree, Michael, but the difference is that all those are gone. But this Jewish exceptionalism has lasted thousands of years and is stronger now, maybe than ever. And the comparison I wanted to draw was, if, the average German soldier probably committed as many atrocities as the average American or British soldier. The SS, since they were steeped a little more in the political part of it, committed more. And the atrocities the Germans are alleged to have committed were committed by a relatively small amount of people on an industrial scale.
And we don't have a clear picture of how many atrocities actually were committed by the Germans. I mean, history is so skewed on that. This whole thing about the Holocaust was made up to allow Israel to get global permission to steal Palestine from the Palestinians for their own use. We know there's been a lot of distortions there. On the other side, I mean, the bombing of German civilian cities, the firebombing of Dresden, the post-war camps where German soldiers were simply starved to death, where we're not taught all of that because we're supposed to be the good guys and the other side are the bad guys. And that, too, is unfortunately an aspect of war and power politics here. But again, I don't want to get into the religious aspect of it. If you go into virtually any religious text, there are things in there that are very offensive and atrocious and seem to be violence. The Old Testament of the Christian Bible, yes, the Talmud and so forth. That's just, it's going to be in there to be taken advantage of and used by those who use religion to manipulate populations into wars of conquest and atrocities and abuse and so forth. Anyway, but we need to keep the focus. What we're talking about when we're talking about the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, we're not talking about religion. We're not talking about ethnic background. It is the actions of the government of Israel which are the problem. And no government is above criticism. The First Amendment exists primarily to allow criticism of any government, including our own, without fear of reprisal or repercussion. And this South Carolina law absolutely flies in the face of that.
Well, Mike, when they declare this a strategic threat, to get anything done against it takes their massive fifth column in the United States. Again, the massive fifth column enabled by their cultural, religious, everything.
Okay, Peter, I don't know how massive their fifth column is because, I mean, the latest polls are showing that support for Israel among American Jews is on the decline. And they're having a hard time scraping up people to maintain this propaganda war. If it's a war of attrition, they're losing. Anyway, listen, Peter, I need to let you go because I'm running out of time, and Claire's joining us at the top of the hour. She's got lots of things to share. So thank you very much for the phone call. But again, when you're talking about boycott, divestment, sanctions, the issue is not the Jewish religion. It is not the ethnicity of the people of Israel, which is Central Asian, Khazar. It is the behavior of the Israeli government that is the problem. Israel's government is acting like a small, spoiled child that you've caught doing something wrong, and you punish them, and they scream, "You don't love me!" to try and get out of it. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're acting like a 5-year-old child, trying to evade the consequences of what they're doing. But they just want to go on doing it because they think it's blessed by whatever. And they do have an unshakable sense of entitlement. And I got to see this close up in my first marriage. It was just a given. We're supposed to have all the goodies. Automatic. In a lot of ways, there are many similarities between, the gypsies and, anyway. Now then, we're seeing a continuing blowback from the collapse of this terror trial over at the Old Bailey in Great Britain. This was a Swedish national named Berlin Gildo, who was being charged with aiding a Syrian group. And here's where the deception starts to come back, because the official story was, oh, ISIS is bad, we're not connected, we're not doing anything. Then we find out the U.S. is running guns from Libya to Syria through that consulate in Benghazi. And documents have now been leaked or declassified that confirm, yes, ISIS is a creation of the United States of America. And so they were trying this guy for all the publicity and the news value about, oh, we got one of these supporters of terrorism out there. And his defense was, I'm helping the same group MI6 is helping. And they basically threw the case out of court rather than allow it to move forward and drag the fact that MI6 was involved with creating and supporting these groups we're all being told are the enemy. It's Emmanuel Goldstein, right out of 1984 here. Now then, over the last couple of days, Pamela Geller has gotten a lot of media coverage because the Boston terror suspect wanted to behead her. Oh, my goodness, let's all feel sorry for Pamela Geller and forget about all the hate-mongering and Muslim bashing she's been doing in her career. Well, apparently, Boston Police Commissioner William Evans has come out saying there is no indication this Boston terrorist suspect planned to do anything with Pamela Geller. So he's dead, they can't ask him, but there was no evidence to support that. Pamela Geller just made this up so she could get back on the talking head shows and out there saying, oh yes, we have a right to draw offensive cartoons about the Muslims to prove that Muslims don't respect the First Amendment. And then, of course, after that, we can go over to the Hells Angels bar and scream, all you pussy bikers suck, to prove that bikers don't respect the First Amendment. Then we can crash a gay pride parade and shout queer and faggot to prove that gays have no respect for the First Amendment. And then we'll finish off the day with a stroll through Harlem screaming nigger to prove the blacks have no respect for the First Amendment. That's how much sense all of this makes. These Muslim cartoon contests, they are provocations, trying to get a reaction that they can seize on to say, see, the Muslims are bad. There's the music. We got to take a commercial break. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And also a reminder, since we've been on the subject of Israel, this coming Monday will be once again the anniversary of Israel's attack on the USS Liberty and the subsequent attempt to cover it up. And they did succeed for a lot of years, but in the long run, truth does get out. Whether it's USS Liberty, Lavon affair, bombing of Tripoli, sooner or later these things get out. And the interval of time gets shorter and shorter. The life expectancy of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer in the age of the Internet. Now then, at this point, I think we're beginning to comprehend that people in positions of wealth, fame, and power just don't see themselves as normal people. The rules don't apply to them, whether they're in political office or whatever. And we're getting back to the situation about child sexual abuse, which I still can't comprehend where they're coming from. Maybe they're doing it just to say they can get away with it, or maybe it's a rite of passage that if you're going to get into the higher levels of corporate or political power, that you got to abuse a kid and they get it on film, and that way you're dependable, you're reliable, they can blackmail you, and that makes you safe. I'm not really sure about that, but I'm looking at the story over in the Daily Mail. Police set to question 13 celebrities, politicians, and sports stars in investigation into historic child abuse on the island of Jersey. And apparently this like the Franklin affair here in the United States of America, was an intentionally set up system of molestation of children that was made available. They've got 45 suspects they're going to be questioning about this. 13 are major personalities. This is all part of Operation Whistle. I mean, we keep seeing these stories come up. It's not just the clergy. You know, what's his face with this island in the Caribbean, and Dershowitz got caught on that one. All righty, let's move on here. I'm going to skip a couple of stories. The Duggar family is still out there trying to explain their way out of Josh Duggar's apparently lifelong tendency of diddling little kiddies, including his sisters, because their reality show is on the line, and they don't want to give that up. It represents a huge amount of money and fame, and they're trying to figure some way to deal with that. They've gone on the attack saying, well, you know, everybody's molesting kids. You know, when you're rich and famous or in the church, it's just one of the perks that come with the job. The problem is whoever made this public, they're the bad guy. We live in an age where whistleblowers are deemed to be the bad guys, and those they're blowing the whistle on, oh, we're poor victims, you know, oh, the NSA, we were just so embarrassed by Edward Snowden. Speaking of NSA, interesting little story has come out regarding the case against one of the whistleblowers, a guy by the name of Drake. And the case against him was that he should have worked within the system. He didn't need to go public. He's bad for not trying to work within the system. Well, it turns out that Drake had been cooperating with the Pentagon Inspector General's office all along, trying to say there is a problem here. These people are over the line. They're violating the Fourth Amendment. And his defense attorneys requested the documents to show that he had, in fact, tried to work within the system, and the documents have been destroyed. So now the NSA is on the defensive here for destroying evidence. Anyway. Now, cool little idea. There's this company called You Are Me Surveillance, and it was created by Chicago-based artist Leo Salvaggio, and he crowdfunded it and set it up where basically he is 3D printing very realistic masks of his own face, which he will sell, so that if you are out someplace where there are TV cameras and you don't want them tracking them, you can just put on his face and they won't know who it is. Not too long ago, we had a company that was advertising with us that was selling baseball caps. The brim is covered with infrared LEDs. You turn that on and your face is just a white blob in these cameras. Doesn't work in the daytime, does work great at night, though. Now, we're continuing to see a bit of a backlash from the Baltimore prosecutor about keeping Freddie Gray's autopsy secret. They don't even want the police able to access the report. This is from Baltimore City Attorney Marilyn Mosby. And obviously, everybody's conclusion is, okay, what are you hiding? What is in there? Because the autopsy should be a public record. Story here, why armed drug cops took every belonging from a Michigan soccer mom. And apparently this woman, Annette Shattuck, wasn't even at home. The cops kicked down the door of her house, entered it, ransacked it. Her daughter, age 10, was there. Her mother was there babysitting the daughter. And they simply came in and they just emptied the place. Took her husband's tools, took the lawnmower, they took a bicycle, all the paperwork. They even took $90 worth of birthday money out of the daughter's bedroom. Because this lady is a licensed provider of medical marijuana, and they thought maybe she had sold marijuana to somebody who wasn't authorized to receive it. They didn't even actually have proof that she'd committed a crime. But they just went in and said, okay, opportunity for civil forfeiture, just emptied out the place. We're basically back to the state of being as the English peasantry, when Sir Guy of Gisborne's men would simply ride across the countryside of Nottinghamshire and help themselves to the pigs and chickens and cows and farmers' daughters whenever they felt like it. That's exactly where we are right now. Another story coming out of St. Louis. St. Louis County police officers came to a home of a person who had been unable to pay their natural gas bill. SWAT team raid, kicked the door down, killed the dog. The raid was carried out because police said they needed to check if the home still had electricity and natural gas service. Remember all those laws? You're not allowed to live off the grid. You will have electricity. You will have gas. You will pay for it. You will be dependent. It really is out of control. Now, up in North Carolina, Governor Pat McCrory has decided he's going to pardon 46-year-old Leon Brown and 50-year-old Henry McCollum, who were convicted and sentenced to death for the rape and murder of Sabrina Buey. Now, it turns out these guys were innocent. And so the governor has decided he might as well go ahead and give them an innocence pardon and release them from prison. They've been in prison on death row for 30 years. And North Carolina is graciously going to give them $750,000 by way of apology. That works out to about $3 an hour for the 30 years that they were wrongfully imprisoned. And their entire youth is gone. One of them's 46, the other one's 50 years old. They're past their prime in their most productive years. This is why I cannot support a death penalty. The system makes mistakes. Ambitious prosecutors who want another notch on their gun, they'll railroad people into the death penalty. Just because they want that record. I got 27 death penalties. Well, I got 42. All right, I'll buy you the drink. Okay, I got a lot about global warming, cold weather in Canberra. Boston is asking, when is summer going to get here? Washington, D.C. hasn't seen a June week this cold in years. Nuuk, Greenland, having its coldest year on record. Greenland still has all of its snow and ice, even has more, and yet we're already seeing news stories coming out about how, there is no hiatus in global warming. It's been getting warmer. In fact, it's even accelerating. I mean, talk about raising on a busted flush. There is obviously something really big behind this whole global warming nonsense, even more than just the carbon tax. For them to be out there still trying to sell this lemon to the American people, they must really think you are stupid to be putting this out here. Got to take a break for the news. Back with the Lady Claire after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And for those of you watching on BAM User TV, this gorgeous hot babe sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to sit in every once in a while on Fridays with her unique perspective. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And before we get on to Claire's topics, though, I have to comment on that SRN news story about how the U.S. government is going after FIFA just as hard as they can to prove how butch they are and that they stand for law and order and justice and opposed to corruption. I wish we saw that same kind of effort directed toward Wall Street. Don't forget, this is the same U.S. government that turned a blind eye to Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme for 12 years until he had cheated his investors and employees and the American taxpayer out of $65 billion. But, SEC couldn't be bothered, U.S. Department of Justice couldn't be bothered, but by golly, they're going to slap those soccer players good and hard to prove that they really stand for law and order. What's your first story, my dear?
The first story that I'd like to share comes to us from Global Research, and the title is Military Madness. U.S. officials consider nuclear strikes against Russia. Well, apparently, U.S. Defense Secretary Carter is meeting today at the headquarters of the U.S. European Command in Stuttgart with 24 U.S. military commanders and European diplomats to discuss how to escalate their economic and military campaigns against Russia. They will assess the impact of current economic sanctions as well as NATO's strategy of exploiting the crisis in eastern Ukraine to deploy ever greater number of troops and military equipment to Eastern Europe, threatening Russia with war. But most scarily, There is a report published by AP yesterday reporting that the Pentagon has been actively considering the use of nuclear missiles against military targets inside Russia, allegedly in response to violations of the 87 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Russia denies U.S. claims that it has violated the INF by flight testing ground-launched cruise missiles with a prohibited range. Okay, folks, this is it. Those Pentagon officials advertising such an act or advocating such an act, in the immortal words of Larry Wilmore, host of the nightly show on Comedy Central, have gone cray-cray, as in crazy. And Mike, I have never been so scared in my life that there is no equivalent to a 25th Amendment to the Constitution for military people who seem to be demonstrating psychotic thinking and psychotic behavior. And that really scares me right now.
We're definitely getting into Dr. Strangelove territory here. The U.S. is talking about, under this claim that Russia has violated this treaty. They're going to start deploying more of the medium-range nuclear-capable missiles to Europe. Russia's understandably nervous, but there is something that probably everybody ought to keep in mind before they let this get too far along. Okay, Russia actually has a working anti-ballistic missile system, and the United States does not. Our tests of our anti-ballistic missile system have about a 50% success rate, which means all Russia has to do is send 2 nuclear warheads to get through to every target. And those 50% success tests of the U.S. system involve incoming targets whose flight path and time are known, and they have locator beacons inside the target drone, the simulator, which is a courtesy I don't think Russia is going to afford us. I mean, out here in Pearl Harbor, we've got this giant floating sea-based radar, $2.5 billion so far, and they just got around to admitting it doesn't really work all that well at detecting things coming in because there are huge gaps as it sweeps around the sky. So, and again, the poor quality and high cost of American weapons, we can presume extends to the strategic nuclear forces at this point. Remember, it wasn't too long ago they came out where the launch code for all of our missiles had been set to all zeros because under stress, the crews in the silos were forgetting the launch codes or they were mistyping the launch codes.
Oh, dear.
You know, so, I mean, it really is a bit of a joke. There have been a lot of near misses with American nuclear weapons. But for them to be advertising this and putting it out there, they're trying to provoke Russia. And again, I don't think they're really wanting the war. What they want is a new Cold War to soak the taxpayer for billions and trillions of dollars to buy ever more lethal new toys, which will sit there and rust and corrode. Because the scam is they never get used. That's why America's weapons are so poor quality. Up until recently, nobody thought they were ever actually going to have to be working.
Well, that might change, and to anyone who is even thinking about a nuclear strike on Russia, to which there will be a sure and certain counterstrike by the Russian military, in my head is nothing less than cray-cray.
It is cray-cray, and we're not saying that just because we've got a first-strike nuclear target right out this window over here. Blinding flash, 12 seconds later, we don't have to worry about retirement.
Second thing, and this comes to us again from Global Research, and one of my heroes in the peace movement, who has been on the show, Steve Lendman. And it's interesting because Steve comes to his peace activism from a more liberal side of the force. We're a little more, I think, on the conservative side. But when it comes to peace, all of us have to work together. And his article today was Kiev renounces Minsk ceasefire. Minsk is dead. Kiev forces are daily committing dozens of ceasefire violations. And it's breached virtually all agreed on terms, and in most cases straight away. And the timing is interesting on this.
Just ahead of the EU summit.
Just ahead of the EU summit, because there is going to be a great advocacy on the part of the U.S. of putting arms and people into Ukraine.
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting. There was this bizarre article the other day about how U.S. military personnel are banned from the G7 location under the excuse they might be attacked, which tells us they're not very good military people.
Yep.
But remember, Europe is very cool on this idea of any more confrontation of Russia, because if a war breaks out, it's going to be fought on their front lawns.
Yeah.
I am very concerned that somebody may try and pull some kind of a stunt at the G7 to galvanize support of Europe and NATO against those gosh darn evil Russians.
It certainly could happen. It may happen. And you keep hearing Poroshenko claiming about a massive Russian troop movement at the border, but he can't prove it. You know, he says these words, he's like the boy who cries wolf, but he has no proof.
Well, that's because the Russians have the Klingon cloaking device, and they're invisible, and, but trust me, they're there. I think he's eating too much of his own chocolate.
Yeah.
I mean, the other day when they were saying, well, where are all the bodies if you're claiming to have successfully rebuffed all these Russians?
And this was wild.
Yeah. And Russia has these mobile cremation machines, and they're driving all over and just turning the Russian soldiers' dead bodies into ash, and that's why we can't find them. Believe it or not, when people started questioning the story of the Holocaust and saying, where were all the bodies? They couldn't find them.
Yeah.
The claim was actually made that the Nazis had invented this electric ray that dissolved the bodies to nothing.
Yeah.
Right out of Buck Rogers. They're gone.
And it's interesting. I do not know and most of Russians, if they are religious at all, they tend to be more toward the Orthodox persuasion. I don't know that the Orthodox Church, how they feel about cremation. I know that they bury, but I don't know,
Well, I'm not sure that their religious preferences would I mean, from Poroshenko's point of view, Russia's doing this just to conceal their evil presence over there in Ukraine. They are trying so hard to get this war going. They're trying so hard to make it look like it's Russia's fault. Nobody is buying this. They're not getting any traction. The whole world knows Ukraine is the fault of the United States, going back to the coup d'etat in January of last year, because Ukraine dared to want to merge with Russia rather than enslave their people to the European Central Bank.
Yeah, and, we're looking at a government structure that just cannot take responsibility for when it messes up. Ever.
Oh, absolutely. Governmental infallibility.
Yeah.
And coupled with that, this very dangerous trait that we've seen, they never admit mistake, error. They never change course. They never back off.
Yeah.
I mean, just before the news break, I was talking about how they're already out there with articles saying, oh, no, global warming is still going on. It's speeding up. And everybody who's remembering this very harsh winter, and it's still snowing in China right now, is saying, come on, guys. They've got to be on drugs. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And Claire, your next story is...
released from prison, anti-war nuclear activist nun, Sister Megan Rice, speaks out. Now, Sister Rice is an 85-year-old nun who broke into the Y-12 National Security Complex in Oak Ridge, Tennessee in 2012, along with brother and sister activists, and was charged originally with sabotage and damaging federal property, and spent about 2 years in federal prison. They were released on the 16th of last month after the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals overturned their sabotage convictions while upholding their convictions for the less serious crime of injury to government property and ordering the original court to re-sentence them on the lesser crime.
Yeah, all they did was they spread paint on a wall, is what they did. That really doesn't reach sabotage. And this was a protest against nuclear weapons.
Yes.
Something I think most of us can get behind.
Yeah. And one of her collaborators said, we accomplished what we set out to do. And I think that this was well spoken and that their faith compelled her and these fellow and sister activists to demonstrate their opposition to nuclear war in a way that was brilliant, peaceful, and worthy of admiration. And I have 3 words for these folks. God bless you. As a person of faith myself, you guys, you took it on the chin, you took the responsibility, and you did things that a lot of us would not have had the moral courage to do. And I will be willing to bet real money that except for antiwar.com, Al Jazeera, and this site, you're not going to hear any reference to this lady and this group. And you know something? If the Nobel Committee wants to restore any credibility to the Nobel Prize. They're thinking about giving it to Poroshenko, aren't they?
The U.S. is lobbying for Poroshenko. At this point, the Nobel Peace Prize is beyond redemption, but there is the National Peace Memorial Foundation, and I think we ought to send this lady's name over to them for consideration for their next annual award, and certainly for inclusion on the monument they're trying to build.
I have every respect for this lady, and I'm sure that while she was in prison, she was ministering to a lot of women who needed it in a very loving and logical way. And I think she may have changed some lives during that stint.
And she did bring a lot of public attention to the fact that the U.S. does have this very expensive, monstrous nuclear arsenal. And we all need to remember, for all this talk about Iraq's non-existent nuclear weapons, Iran's non-existent nuclear weapons, all of this stuff, in all of human history, only one nation has ever actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country, and that nation is the United States of America.
Yeah. The next topic I'd like to talk about, apparently, now this is not sourced, it's for what it's worth, but it did appear in antiwar.com. They felt its credibility was strong enough to have it posted. Iran is sending 15,000 fighters to Syria. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
All right.
Iran has sent 15,000 fighters to Syria to reverse recent battlefield setbacks for Syrian government troops and wants to achieve results by the end of the month. And it's a Lebanese political source has told the Lebanese Daily Star. The military force will be comprised of Iranians, Iraqis, Afghanis, and have arrived in the Damascus region and the coastal province of Latakia. And they are looking to retake the Idlib province, where the regime has suffered a string of setbacks at the hand of rebel jihadi coalition. General Qassem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's elite Quds forces, was in Latakia this week to shore up preparations for the campaign and promised a surprise from Tehran and Damascus. Now, Michael, if this is true, what we're looking at, I think, is the creation of a proxy U.S.-Iranian conflict in Syria.
Yes, that would definitely be. Well, it's not proxy on the part of Iran.
No.
The U.S. proxies in Syria, we now have confirmed, are ISIS. We've known all along the Free Syrian Army, 95% of them are not Syrian. They're hired mercenaries.
Yeah, they're mercs.
And, it's kind of interesting. We're talking about how the Pentagon is now saying they can't tell where $8.5 trillion went. I think a lot of that went to paying these and equipping these hired mercenaries all over the globe.
Yeah.
And they're trying to say, not us. We don't know where the money went, but trust us, it didn't go to hire mercenaries to go on out and carry out U.S. foreign policy, in a deniable fashion.
And this, what I'm thinking, Mike, and I'd like your sense of this, this may be the opening salvo for U.S.-Israeli attack against Iran if the P5+1 talks fail the end of this month. And right now, if I were a betting person, I wouldn't bet against it.
Well, there's a political dimension you need to keep in mind, because supposedly Iran, is fighting against the terrorists, ISIS, that the U.S. is screaming are the bad guys. And same thing is going on in Iraq. The U.S. has said, mind your own business, Iran, but they really can't say that Iran is opposing the United States when Iran and the United States are purportedly both targeting the same common enemy, which is ISIS.
Yes.
And that's what makes it very, very difficult to justify a war or attack on Iran on the basis that Iran is deploying troops against ISIS that we are being told are the bad guys.
Theoretically.
It's a complex issue. Yeah. And, people are going to be saying, wait a minute, why are we angry with Iran for fighting against the people we were told are the bad people?
Interesting point. And I'd like to talk about the nuclear talks, the P5+1 talks, the demands the U.S. is suddenly putting in there. And in the final phase of the negotiations with Iran, the U.S.-led international coalition is still seeking Iran's agreement to allow the IAEA to visit any military facility at once and to interview a selected number of Iranian nuclear scientists. Folks, this was never a part of the original agreement.
It certainly was,
Yeah.
and it's a last-second edition, and it's not just IAEA.
Yeah.
France is leading the charge of saying that Iran must open all of their military facilities to inspections by any of the signers of the P5+1. That, of course, is something Iran is not going to do. Iran is standing by their guns saying that this agreement is about guaranteeing that we're not building nuclear weapons, and there is no evidence we're building nuclear weapons because we're not building nuclear weapons. It is not a license for the other nations to commit espionage against us on a constant, ongoing basis.
Yeah, and what it looks as though it's happening here is the U.S. is creating an attempt to make its policies seem sweetly reasonable while making the Iranian government to appear to be the bad guys for not agreeing to something that they never agreed to in the first place.
Yeah, even when that framework agreement was passed, you know, Iran came out and said that what Obama was describing to the American people was not what was actually in that framework agreement. And when that all came down, I said, what's being set up is they're going to tell you the agreement said X, Y, and Z, even though it wasn't there, so that when Iran balked at X, Y, and Z, the U.S. could say, well, see, Iran is to blame here.
And again, were I a betting person, because these talks have been engineered to fail, when June 30th comes around, I would almost be willing to bet that there will not be a deal, that the deal cannot be consummated because the Iranians cannot, in good faith, agree to what the U.S. is asking for.
Well, because Iran is already seeing that the U.S. and the rest of the P5+1 are negotiating in bad faith. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, your next story is?
This comes from the Department of You Cannot Possibly Make This Up. As reported today in antiwar.com, Iraqi Sunni tribes announce backing for ISIS as sectarian tensions soar. The Pentagon has made it their centerpiece of its strategy in Iraq to arm the Anbar Sunni tribes to convince them to come back to the Shiite-dominated government. The plan has stalled by the government because they're blocking most of the arms transfers, and with sectarian tensions on the rise, it looks like some of those tribes are going the other way. Today, Key Anbar Sheikh Ahmed Jumaili read a joint statement from a number of key tribes in Fallujah pledging loyalty to ISIS and expressing their belief that the best way to return calm to the province was by backing ISIS against the infidels, apostates, and Shiites. And I had a palm-to-forehead moment at Velocity when I read this, and it's just when you think that U.S. foreign policy could not get any more screwed up than it already is concerning Iraq.
I imagine there's a lot of people running around the Middle East going, who am I supposed to be hating today?
Yeah.
You know.
Who's the 15 minutes of hate for?
But if the real agenda is to balkanize Iraq and break it into multiple sections, then this all makes a lot of sense.
Yes, it does. And, of course, that's an idea that Israel has floated for years, balkanize it, so that it can never again achieve its former
so it's easy to bully and push around is basically what they want.
And I mean, before the U.S. invasion and occupation, Iraq had one of the highest standards of living and education among all the countries of the Middle East. They were doing beautifully.
So was Libya.
Yeah,
I mean, every one of these nations that the U.S. has overthrown the government and gone on in and taken over the place, the quality of life just goes right into the Al-Qaeda because the wealth of the nation is stripped off for the pockets of America's money junkies.
Yeah. I would like to move to something a little closer to home and having to do with science and health. And it's an update where the EPA is saying fracking not a widespread risk to drinking water. And this comes directly from the EPA.
Yeah.
And they say that fracking for shale oil and gas has not led to widespread pollution of drinking water. And it's a draft report that was issued yesterday, although it did warn that some drilling activities could potentially cause health risks. And the study requested by Congress and 5 years in the making said fracking could contaminate drinking water under certain conditions, such as when fluids used in the process leaked into the water table.
Well, that's already happened to two of California's aquifers. There are a lot of documented cases where previously safe water has been contaminated by these fracking fluids. There's now a study out, we link to at whatreallyhappened.com, where they're starting to realize that the birth weight of babies born in areas where fracking is occurring is now much less than the birth weight of babies born in areas outside those fracking zones. And by the way, they had 4 more small quakes in Oklahoma today on those fracking fields.
Now, I am sure that the executives of oil companies who are doing the fracking and contribute mightily to both parties' war funds in this country are doing their happy dance right now. Now, I am a person who believes that anyone who approves of fracking on the federal or state level must be compelled to live with their family as close to where fracking is done as possible. And I'm going to cite that report that you talked about. And it's reported, I believe, at WebMD. And it's living close to a high number of fracked natural gas wells may be linked to an increased risk of having a lower birth weight baby. And this is a study by a Pennsylvania group. Natural wells using this method are increasingly common in the U.S., and, for example, the number of these types of wells in Pennsylvania's Marcellus shale oil rose from 44 in 2007 to more than 2,800 in 2010. And they did the analysis of the birth records of more than 15,400 babies born in Pennsylvania's Washington, Westmoreland, and Butler counties between 2007 and 2010. Women who lived close to a high number of natural gas fracking sites were 34%, that's intense, 34% more likely to have babies who were small for gestational age than those who didn't. And this is really scary, you know.
Well, it's really scary to have a government that's out there totally on the side of the large corporations to tell you that vaccines are safe, GMOs are safe, fracking is safe, little radiation is good for you.
Right.
Humans are warming the planet. And at this point, I mean, we are just steeped in lie after lie after lie.
Yeah.
And I think the sooner that all Americans wake up and realize that, yes, everything coming out of the government and the corporate media is a lie that serves a political or corporate purpose, the better off we're all going to be. Because at the very least, we're just going to stop listening to them and we're going to decide for ourselves. No, these fracking effluents are not safe. Out in California, they're talking about using this fracking wastewater to irrigate crops during the drought situation. And the drought is exacerbated by the fact that fracking has contaminated 2 of their large freshwater aquifers. And obviously, if you're putting these toxic chemicals all over food plants, the food that you're producing in those farms is not going to be safe. I'm sure the FDA will declare that they're safe. And the USDA will declare that they're safe because they don't really have a choice. We've run out of safe, healthy food for the people of planet Earth, and governments, rather than risk food riots, are going to go out there and say, look, this stuff is perfectly safe for you to eat. And if you get sick, well, it stimulates the economy because then you got to go to the doctor and you got to buy medicines and you got to go to the hospital. So it's all really a good thing.
Yeah, and it really angers me in behalf of all these families who are dealing, because low birth weight babies are prone to a million health problems as they get older. But of course, the politicians who get paid off to look the other way and the oil companies making the huge profits from this process, these babies and their families are just collateral damage.
I wouldn't worry about these underweight babies growing up with medical problems. They're not even going to survive getting their vaccines.
And Mike, in my world, all lives matter.
Absolutely,
all
I agree.
Lives matter.
Especially little tiny babies who have not had their life yet. They truly are the innocents among us who are being victimized by whether it's fracking or this vaccine culture or the GMO food. I mean, they are the innocents who are harmed by corporate greed.
Yeah, and of course, with all of the GMO companies saying no labeling, when the fracking water has gone in to nurture the plants, there will be no warning labels on that either. So the American public is going to have to take an educated guess and really do their homework in terms of, do I know where this stuff comes from? And I think that establishing a good relationship with the people who work in your markets, can you tell me a little bit about where they come from?
Yeah, but even they're not going to know. I mean, we've got the World Health Organization has gotten the U.S. government to agree that meat will no longer carry a label that says where it came from. So when you're eating your piece of a cow, you don't know if it came from Montana or Mexico or someplace on the other side of the globe that's dealing with an outbreak of mad cow disease. You have no right to know if the food that you're eating is safe or not because it's making money for corporations, and as long as the corporations are happy, that's all that really counts in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and it's you really have to do your due diligence, and I know it's going to be more expensive and it's going to be a pain, but if you can, try to get as much as you can from local health food stores, people who are selling
local farmers before they're all banned or absorbed
farmers
by
markets.
Monsanto. Yes.
Please do your due diligence online and figure out where is going to be a good place for you to get produce for your family and also other stuff.
Yeah, because unfortunately this corporate government cartel is hostile to your health. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Final segment of our program on this Pauhana Friday. And Claire, you had one more story you wanted to share.
Well, actually a couple if we have time.
Yes.
NATO is beginning a huge sea and air campaign in the Baltic. And it involves over 5,000 troops, scores of ships and aircraft, despite declaring the Baltic states to be under no threat from Russia. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said on Thursday that the alliance sees no immediate threat from Russia to its Baltic member states, despite NATO itself ramping up military forces in the region. This move has been engineered to assure the Russian government that NATO is absolutely up to no tricks, right?
I think they're out there just trying to thump their chest after that embarrassment with the Donald Cook.
Yeah.
And just, all right, we dare you to try and jam all of us now.
Well, NATO appears to be, if anyone knows about bullfighting, what a picador does, it annoys the bull enough that the matador can make all of his moves and get the bull exhausted, and finally the bull is killed. And it seems to me that they're working hard to either create an incident to which Russia must respond, or alternatively, create a false flag to blame on Russia to get the U.S. people on board for a war against it. Well, I have a short memo for NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Heck no, sir. Absolutely not. The American people are war-weary, we are war-skeptical, and will not support such an insane mission, either on the part of NATO or the U.S. military. And the reason? We have seen just how brilliantly the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan has gone, how wonderfully stable Libya is after the assassination of Gaddafi, and we understand that any U.S. NATO intervention anywhere on this planet will be doomed to become yet another epic fail. And Mike, it's become painfully clear to me that the concept of negotiation in good faith has been wiped clean away from the NATO lexicon.
They're not interested. I mean, we've got Greece has missed their payment today.
Mm-hmm.
They're calling it a delay so as not to trigger the credit default swaps and saying, Greece is going to bundle this payment in with the next one. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
We're looking at a major economic upheaval, and unless the United States, and to be more direct, the bankers, can get a major war going with Russia and or China on which to blame the financial crash, they realize that ordinary people like you and I and all of our listeners are going to point the finger of blame for the economic crash where it properly deserves to go. Wall Street's crimes and corruptions, aided and abetted by a complicit U.S. federal government. And that's why they're trying to get a war going so they got something to blame it on. They're looking back at history about how crash of 1907, distract from it or get out of it with World War I, crash of 1929, distract from it, get out of it with World War II, crash of 2008, and look how many nations the U.S. has invaded, drone struck, bombed, overthrown, and now they're trying to go right to the top to Russia and China because the ruble and the yuan are coming on very, very strong against the dollar. And a new world war is the only way they can stop it from happening. And they don't care how many of other people's children they have to send to death and dismemberment to win their little money junkie wars.
Michael, there has been some scuttle online about potentially gold-backed yuans and gold-backed rubles. How close are we to that, do you think?
Well, it's all going to be at what point Russia and China feel secure enough to make that move, because when they do, it is going to be an immediate hammer blow on the dollar.
Right.
It's going to goose gold prices right through the roof. We know that Russia has just committed to boosting their gold reserves by 40%, which is a major, major uptick.
Yeah.
All the other nations who have their gold stored at the New York Federal Reserve are getting very antsy that they can't seem to get it back, which means they can't back their currencies with gold when it starts to come apart.
Yeah.
And at this point, I'm sure Russia and China are preparing to make that move. They know when it happens, the U.S. is probably going to hit the panic button. And panic button with the U.S. usually means some kind of a military strike.
Yeah. What do you think the timing will be? If you were going to project into the longer term, at what point do you see this potentially happening with Russia and China? And perhaps they might be looking at a currency that was a mutual currency for both countries, with the BRIC nations backed by gold.
They might, just like the European Union tried to have the euro, but the euro is a debt-based currency, just like the U.S. Federal Reserve note. And therein, of course, is its built-in self-destruct mechanism.
Right.
When this might happen, I don't know. I think the open question right now is how much longer the U.S. and the European Union are going to be able to delay the impact of Greece's failure to meet their payment. Because they're stalling. They're calling it a delay. They're saying, someplace in the next 2,000 years, Greece will make good on the payment, so we don't have to declare a default. But that is not going to really hold together much longer, especially if Greece misses the next payment. And Greece is already turning away from the ECB and the IMF toward Russia and saying, we want to align with you. At the point where Greece breaks with the European Union and writes off that debt, they're not going to be able to pretend that it's a delay any longer. And at that point, you're going to start seeing the dollar in serious trouble. And it would be at that point that Russia and China could make a move to saying part of our currency is backed in gold. That would be the coup de grace against the U.S. dollar and the private central bankers.
Right. And when you say backed by gold, how much of that currency would be all of it backed by gold, or just a small portion of it? What do you think?
I would just be a portion of it because they've got too much currency in circulation. It depends on how they value the gold, because the world has gotten along on the London gold and silver fix. Those have been discredited as being rigged. The private central banks have been trying to hold the price of gold down, first of all, to discourage people from emptying their savings accounts and stock portfolios and getting into gold.
Right.
Second, they want the price of gold as low as possible while they try and buy enough of it to replace the bullion that they were storing for these other countries. But if Russia were to come out and say, we're backing our currency with gold to 50,000 rubles per ounce, and same thing with China. Obviously, the price of gold is denominated in U.S. dollars would go right through the roof. And at that point, again, there is no easy way out of this mess, and that's why the U.S. strategy is mushroom clouds all over the place, and then in the middle of all the dust and debris and fallout, they say, all right, we're going to hit the restart. We're going to start a whole new private central bank and a whole new fiat debt-based currency, and life will be fine for at least another 50 years.
It is amazing, the American political and corporate mentality toward war. It seems to be their consistent solution, quote unquote, to everything that's wrong.
It's good for business. I mean, war profiteering is the most profitable of all, outside of these financial bubbles of Wall Street. Yesterday we put up an article talking about the push for war, showing the stock performance charts for the last 5 years of the top U.S. military contractors. They're making out like bandits. The war machine is the only part of our industrial base that still seems to be running at a profit, only because the U.S. is giving weapons to both sides of these wars, like they've done in Iraq. You, the American taxpayer, are paying for the weapons that ISIS is using, and you're paying for the weapons that Iraq is using against ISIS. It doesn't matter who wins or loses. You, the American people, are made to pay for it all. And not just you, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, because the debt is simply carried forward to infinity. And because of the way private central banking operates, the debt can never, ever be paid off. It is a tool of mass enslavement of all people who are in countries that are enslaved to these private central banks. Because when your country loses control of its own currency, when control of that currency passes to the bankers, you are a slave nation. And I don't care what labels you put out there and what songs you have and flags you wave, you are a slave nation when you are not in control of your own currency.
Absolutely. And we are there.
We are there. Have been there for 100 years now.
It's I look around at this country and I don't recognize it anymore. And that's one of the saddest things to me about everything that I see going on, because I can see and I can research what the backstory is.
Well, it is tragic. Watching it happen, it's like seeing a loved one wither away from cancer is what it feels like, seeing what's happened to the United States. There's the music. It's time for Claire and I to get out of here. I got another interview to get on to, and we'll be back Monday here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, go ahead and get angry. You deserve it. Share what you know with everyone you know. The time to speak out publicly is now. Aloha, America.